people started making some kind of mark, their needs were simple. Perhaps they wanted to check their property or to record time. This American Indian sign means morning, this one noon, and this is their sign for afternoon. Some Indian tribes of North America wrote their historical records on wild animal skins that had been stretched and dried. The characters they used were often simple pictures from which the viewer could get the meaning. For example, this Indian and white man shaking hands marks the year 1855, when the Dakota tribes made a treaty with the United States. This picture, found on stone in New Mexico, is a warning to travelers that the path is steep. A goat can make it, but it's too steep for a horse. Various systems of writing were developed long ago in various parts of the world. Each system started as simple pictures, and each developed to suit the needs of the people. In China, men often painted their written messages on rice paper or silk. They used ink and a flexible pointed brush, which they held upright. The lines, which made up the symbol, were designed so that they easily followed the flowing strokes of the brush. In other parts of the world, other ways of writing developed. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, a great civilization grew up, and with it, a different form of writing. Wedge-shaped marks were pressed in wet clay by a reed with a three-cornered head. This type of writing became known as cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. When the writing was finished, the clay tablets were baked hard in the sun. Another great civilization grew up in Egypt, along the valley of the Nile River. In Egypt, there was a great deal of stone, and the Egyptians cut their pictures in it. It was slow work, but detailed and accurate. Another writing material in Egypt was made from the papyrus reed. Our word paper comes from papyrus. This is how the Egyptians made paper. After they had cut the papyrus stalks into lengths, they peeled off the tough outer part of the stalks. Then they made strips of the inside part and placed these strips side by side on a smooth, flat surface. On these strips they placed another layer, crosswise. When these were hammered, the sticky sap of the plant welded the strips together. The sheets were pressed and dried, and then polished with a smooth stone. On papyrus, the pictures once carved in stone became much simpler and different. But eventually, both the Egyptian and the Babylonian sign writing became so complicated that only some of the priests and professional scribes could readily master them. The next part of our story concerns the land now called Palestine and Syria. Prominent among the ancient Semitic tribes of this area were the Hebrews and the Phoenicians. Many were traders, and these found it necessary to have a simple writing suited to their needs when trading with Egyptians or Babylonians, for example. Out of this necessity evolved the invention of the alphabet. Our word alphabet was derived from two Semitic symbols, Aleph, meaning ox, and Beth, meaning house. The Semitic people discarded picture meanings and concentrated on sounds alone. They found that 22 sounds were all they needed, so they had 22 letters in their alphabet. 22 sounds, 22 letters, one sound for each letter. The earliest complete alphabet we know of comes from Gebal on the Syrian coast. Since there were no vowels in the written language, the name Gebal was written like this. The Phoenicians, chief merchants among the Semitic tribes, were seafaring men and traveled all over the Mediterranean. In the course of business, they carried their alphabet to many other peoples. The most important of these were the Greeks. The Greek name for the town of Gebal was Byblos, meaning papyrus, since here was their source of supply. From Byblos, they got tabiblia, which means writing, and from this we get our word Bible. Thus, from such picture writing as the signs for ox and house, there developed through centuries not only the letters of Greek and Roman alphabets, but also those of our own alphabet. Now the Romans sometimes carved on stone, as other peoples had done. They also wrote on wooden tablets coated with wax, using a metal tool called a stylus. One end was pointed for writing, the other rounded for rubbing out. At first, all the letters were capitals, but as people tried to write more quickly, they changed the form of the letters. About 800 years after Christ, under Emperor Charlemagne, a style of writing developed in France wherein the letters began to look very much like the small letters we use today. In the Middle Ages, the clergy were almost the only people who could write. Books were copied entirely by hand, and the writers took great pains to make them attractive in appearance. But clerks also began to write records for kings and courts. This writing was more ordinary and everyday. Also in Italy, old classical manuscripts were being unearthed, and these had an effect on letter styles. About 1450, there came another revolutionary development, the invention of letterpress printing. With movable type and the printing press, the whole story of writing changed. With type and ink and press, printers could make hundreds of copies of books in a very short time, and each book would be exactly like the other. Before this time, books had been very rare. Few people could use books because they couldn't get them. It wasn't long before people could get books. Books on how to write. The famous plays of Shakespeare, written into books. Adventure books, and others. Handwriting came to be used for personal purposes, such as this letter from Queen Elizabeth, from Captain Cook, the well-known explorer. This is the handwriting of Alexander Pope, the poet, and here the manuscript of a well-known poem. Through the years, styles of writing have differed, but all of them, including the handwriting you use today, have descended from the first alphabet.